Thank you. I'll go now to welcome MC for today, Mr. Arisa Amour. Please go on. That leaders. Thank you.
Everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Unfortunately, obviously we can't be in person, but it's nice to still be in everybody's presence all together, even if we are in our own homes. We have a 2-hour program. I'll give you a brief rundown of what we can expect over the next couple of hours. So we're going to start off with a short message from Calgary's Mayor Nahid Nenshi. This is going to be followed by our guest speaker, Pierre Gatera. And then around 3:45, we'll have a quick 5-minute break. So grab some water, tea, go to the bathroom, take a quick break, and then we'll be back around 3:50. After that, we'll hear a lovely poem by Happy Umwangarwa. And then right after that, we'll hear some brief remarks from Mr. Artemon Rurangwa about his book, Rwanda, les angoisses d'Adelaide. And then we will hear from our second main speaker, Dr. Chigbo Arthur Anyanduba. And we will wrap it up with a quick question and answer period. And you can address your questions in the chat function to either of our 3 guest speakers, and then Mel will wrap it up for us. So whenever we're ready, I'll quickly unmute myself and we can hear from Calgary's Mayor Nahid Nenshi.
Hello, it's Nahid Nenshi, Mayor of Calgary, and I want to really thank the Rwandan Canadian Society of Calgary for bringing us together again this year to commemorate the anniversary of the beginning of the genocide. I really wish the message could change from year to year. I wish that I could say that we as humanity have learned that lesson of never again. But in fact, across the world, we're seeing increasing waves of hatred and division and violence. And we're seeing that in so many places, including, of course, in places like Myanmar and to the Uyghur people in China. And that promise of never again sometimes feels a little bit empty. But we cannot give up hope. Today is a day where we mourn the loss of so many loved ones, but it's also the day where we fight for renewal and realignment and pushing for that promise of never again. I am so proud that so many Rwandan Canadians have chosen to make their home here in Calgary, and I'm grateful for that, including survivors. But I do want to let you know that here in Calgary, we want you to feel safe, and we want you to feel that you can live a life of great dignity and prosperity and opportunity for yourself, for your children, for their children. And if you feel like you're not getting the mental health support you need, there is no shame in that. And we have resources to help you. So call 211 anytime, 24 hours a day, and tell them what you're thinking, and they will connect you with resources that you need. And in addition, we need to talk about racism in our own community. We learned in 2020 that it's not enough for us to be pluralistic and multicultural and striving to be anti-racist. We need to actually get there. We need to go from trying to be not racist to being truly anti-racist to ensure that everyone in our community, particularly Black Canadians, have the opportunity to live lives of their full potential. And we are committed to that. The City of Calgary is committed to anti-racism. I am personally, while I'm in this role and long after. So today is indeed a day of great sadness. It's a day of enormous mourning, of loss. But I hope that we can also take it as a day to recommit ourselves to the fight against racism and to the fight for dignity of everyone who shares this land.
Okay, next we are going to hear our survivor testimony. Mr. Peter Gatera has joined us. He's a survivor of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsis. He's a father of 4 boys and a man of God. He was born and raised in Rwanda. He escaped the genocide and fled to Kenya and then to Canada in 1999. He's lived in Edmonton since 2006, where he works as an independent artisan builder. He's here to bravely share with us his survivor testimony. So let's give him the time to do that. Peter, whenever you're ready, you can unmute yourself and start sharing. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Do you hear me?
Yes, you can.
Yes. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I think today is a special day for me or for all of us as Rwandan, especially the survivors of the genocide. We are grateful to see our friend of Rwanda also who cares about us, because our lives was special lives and it's really different lives. To understand this life, you have to wear the same jacket or the same shoes as we are wearing now to understand what we're going through. Otherwise, it's so hard to understand our story. They asked me to give my testimony. My testimony, if it was a book, I should call The Way Out of My Pit. That if it was a book, I should name The Way Out of My Pit. Why? As a survivors of genocide, to be alive today is extra day. Otherwise, we should be in the museum. Our bones should be in the memorial houses, dry bone long time ago. But God give us other chance to survive and to speak out what's happened that day. When the genocide take place, I was mature. I was 35 years old that time. I had two kids that time, two boys. One was five years old, another one was 6 years old. Actually, before genocide, a little bit before, and my life, I started to struggle because they came to my house. The youth of Interahamwe and SEDER was the political party that time, who are really was radical extremists. They come to destroy my house on 22nd of February. That's before 2 months before the genocide. They came early in the morning. I remember the story. I say my story is in me. What I'm talking is in me. I can't forget the date. I forget the day because it's happened. Is the story of my life actually. And the guy that came early in the morning around 7:30 around. Somebody come before them because he came say somebody they are coming to your house to kill you. I go in the house, I close the door, but I was waiting something, I don't know what's gonna be. And they came, they break all the window, all the glass of my house, all of them. But they never come in, they stay, they are looking what they can do after the new instruction, if they're gonna kill or to do anything else. That was early in the morning in February, before genocide. Remember, the genocide took place in April. That was in February. They came, they break my house. And in the afternoon, when the leader of CDR, the political party, SEDER, was killed in Butare, other province, they came to my house because the guy was living to my village, but he died far from my village. Right away, they came to kill everybody in our village. It was in the afternoon when they was destroying many houses, they killed many people. I remember that day they killed around 6 or 8 people. That day, that was February. That's the day I was managed to get out of my house. I went downtown where I was survived. I was lived for 2 months. Was in the culture center, French culture center, where I have been for 2 months. When the genocide, when it took place, I was there. He started when I was in that house. The day before the genocide, I sent my family in the countryside to visit the kids to visit grandma. The same day, evening on 6th, the president died, and the genocide, they start to kill actually the same night of 6th. On 7th was just the genocide was spread everywhere in the world, in the country. That day was completely no chance. When you seemingly there is no chance to survive. I remember the news on RLF, Radio France. They say there was killing around 20,000 per day. 20,000 per day. That's a huge number. People was killed like nothing. Can you believe on the news, nobody who cares when they say 20,000 is killed per day, was passing through the alive people, cutting people. That time I said, now I know for sure I'm gonna die. My question was this: which way they're gonna kill me? By machete, by shooting, by what? I didn't understand. I accept the death because there's no way out. But I was thinking about the way they're gonna kill me. I was asking, maybe if I get chance to shoot me, that's quick. I choose that one if they can give me opportunity to choose. But I was struggling to see what, there is no way I can hide. I say anytime when they came here, it's finished. But God has millions ways to save. After 3 days, the army of France was coming where I was hiding in a culture center. They was there to rescue the French people. They came there for protection of the embassy and the other French people. And they was planning to gathering them together in this culture center there, was the big place we had that time. After they changed mind, they take they take all the French people other place. We asked them to help us. They never do anything. They leave us in the hall, the military. We had like 100 military in our place, but they never do anything about they leave us there. Then we went to after on the 9th, they came on 6th, they came on the 9th, on 12th. On 12th, the Belgium came there, and then the France was left. They asked us, what are you doing here? So we are hiding here. We are waiting actually anything happen. Okay, they say we are coming here for short time. After few hours, like 3 hours only, the program changed. They said now we was coming to rescue our people from the village. Now the mission is changed. One chance, go in the truck. They give us the opportunity to go in the truck. We went to airport to Nairobi. But remember, my family was left behind. There is no any communication. There is no chance to know what's going on. For sure, I was when they take me, I had at least a chance, because I still in Rwanda, I had a chance, maybe 50% to be saved. But the family, my wife and my two children that time, was left behind, was a calvary to me. When I am rescued by the Belgium, but people, my family, left behind. I'm talking family, but I'm not talking about family tree. Whole family tree. What happened when the genocide took place? All of them was killed. No one left behind. No one left behind. I saw the last day to see my family was on 22nd of February when I left in my village. The other family tree was no longer exist. That's who I am. Then it was a really hard life. The Belgium give another opportunity to give us light from airport of Kanombe, Kigali to Nairobi. Is a miracle. Is a super miracle. Everybody can understand. To get the light of the car was impossible, and I get the light of the airplane, military airplane. That's why I say God it take the hand of God itself to save my life. When we went in Nairobi, was a group of people who was we was gathered. We met to the airport, and it was around 150 people, and we went to Nairobi. But remember, all my family was left behind. There is no joy. I was alone. I was crying without knowing. I don't know the end of my crying until 2 months. I was the hope. I know what I know for sure. I knew that maybe I was thinking all my family is killed. I was in a bad life I never seen in my life, crying all the time, especially at night. When I think who I am, I was thinking my life. I am single, I'm married, who I am. There is no way to hold. I was crying out all night, but God is good. One day, someone come to me and take me to somewhere to the church. Was a Christian church, and someone give me some message, prophetic message. I said, I see you crying. I say, yes, I am. I do. So why are you crying? So, my family killed was Kenyan, remember? He said, no, your family is still alive. He said, no, my family is killed. He said, listen, God is not a liar. Your family is alive. Can you receive Jesus as your personal savior? Yes. I accept and I receive Jesus as my personal savior that day. He said, okay, receive him and you're gonna see what the next. I thank God because after receiving Jesus as my personal savior was the month of August. Remember that all the 3 months of genocide, there is no clue of anyone left behind. There is no even hope of anyone left behind because, as you know, all the Tutsi was in Rwanda at that time. I can say maybe, I don't know exactly, but more than 95% or 98% who was in Rwanda at that time was killed. The survivors only maybe like 3%. I don't know exactly. I don't have the number, but the number of survivors was very, very, very small. And after 4 days, that's somebody was coming from Rwanda, was after genocide in the month of August. And he bring me the story. I sent him to my village and he met with my family. Actually, is the guy, I think he's on the line now. The guy I sent there is Jean-Claude. He lives in Calgary, you know him, maybe some people know him. He's the one I sent in Rwanda and met with my family and come back with the message, say, you know what, your family is still alive. Oh, what a joy. What a joy. It was amazing for me, but still only 2 children and my wife. Other people, my brother, my relatives, my mother, because my dad he died before, all family tree, no one left behind. We as survivors of genocide, we have a special life. As the one who was mature at that time, I know how much it costs to be a single in the world. A single person. I remember in 2015, I was in Rwanda. No one can know me. In my village, that's ridiculous. I born there. I grew up there. No one who know me. That is the wound we live with. We live with the heavy wound. People can try to comfort you. Here in North America, Western American people, they are very good. When you have a problem, they can touch your back and scratch, maybe to make you comfortable. But for us, it doesn't touch anything. For survivors, there is nothing you can do to touch the wound, because the wound is deeper, deeper, deeper inside. I say so as someone who have a chance to talk with some people of my community. As I say, as a preacher, I have a chance to meet with many people, to talk with them, to try to give them another comfort. But when they tell me the truth, I know how deep, I understand how deep the wound is, really, really deep. That's why sometimes people, they can react differently according the wound, how the wound is really deep. Sometimes people can be quiet, can be lonely, can be maybe can have different behavior. Because I'm lucky, because since I get saved, God changed my life. I can be able to manage my emotions. I can, when it weighs too much, I can't hold it, because the Bible says so. I give all my burden to Jesus Christ. I feel someone somehow is holding my burden, and he cares about it. But it's not everybody who has that chance to talk or to give his burden to Jesus Christ. That's a problem even I have. That's why all the time I try, if I can, to meet or to speak with my people, say, there is another chance. There is a hope. Brethren, there is another hope to be able to survive. Maybe if you try this way, I try to push people of my community, to push them to Jesus, because only is the one who can be a good counselor, who can be a healer of our wound. People, we have a good government. He tried the best, to the point he bought the budget of the survivors to support them. That's really extreme. I can applaud for that. But the wound of someone left without any children, the old women, old men, or a child left behind when he was 1 year old, without anyone in the world. Can you believe who can give him a hope? Who can give him happiness? No one only is Jesus who can help. That's the life of survivors. That's the life of our people. That's what we are living with. That's all the time we're struggling. I remember, sometimes I think I'm strong enough, but when the time of genocide, like this month, I remember 2 days ago, I was really, I had time that day. So I was wondering, this is after 27 years old, 27 years, why I still have this feeling. I was thinking maybe that's way too long and maybe we can, no, the wound is fresh, open. When we remember how for example, I lost all my brothers, was young. I think my big brother, he was 40s that time. And another one was 45, like something like that. And their children, and they was very young. I supposed to have it. Even my mom was not too old. Supposed to be today. He may be maybe 75, 78 years old today, or 80s. But in 1 hour, I remember one story I will never forget. When I was in the airport of Kenya, waiting to accept us to go in Kenya, because we have stayed in transit for a couple months. Is the other story. Someone came to me. He said, he told me the story. He said, I passed to your house. If you go back home, only something you can take home is peas. You know what he's talking about? The peas. The farmers, they can understand very well, because my houses was debris. Back home, if they like to, the farmers, they put the peas on debris, they cultivate as a laughing, they put the peas, now the peas growing quick. And my houses was only debris to compare with the farm of the peas. What I was making for years, in one hour, no house, nothing, no family, just all the world was completely, everything was demolished. Now I thank Canada because he gave us another chance. Canada, he gave another chance again to start to build our lives. Our country, Rwanda, also give Rwandan hope. Now we are free. We can visit Rwanda. We can do something in Rwanda. We can enjoy. Still, on top of that, the same problem. You can't hide it. Now I have a group of people who live in my village, the survivors of my village. We are talking. We are communicating this time. Now I can understand how deep they are really crying in their heart, how the wound they have today. They was sending me the picture of their families, their fathers, their relatives. Nothing you can do. We are crying. We try to comfort each other. We just to give everyone good words, to give for a hope, but still, brethren, friend of Rwanda, we need your hand. We need your comfort also. We need to understand us much better, because our lives is very delicate. It's like eggs. I remember a story of someone who have been working in a Kargil. He was a survivor. Kargil, where they butcher the meat, only to kill the meat. Now he end up in Alberta hospital here. To see the blood of cow completely, his life is ruined. He's in the Alberta hospital, in mental hospital, only to see how they're cutting the cow. That's how we are very delicate our lives. That's how we survived. Thank you so much to take this time to understand. God bless you.
Thank you so much for sharing that, for your vulnerability, for the encouragement too. We really appreciate that. That brings us to a quick break. Take a 5-minute break right now. And when we return, we'll hear a poem by Happy Wangarwa and a book, brief remarks about Artimon Rurangwa's book. So we'll be back in about 5 minutes, so 3:38-ish. We'll see you soon.
Yara majorania amanywa yuzuye imiborogo aho umuntu yazize uko yavutse ora Rwanda ntibizongera Yara majorania amanywa yuzuye imiborogo aho umuntu yazize uko yavutse ora Rwanda ntibizongera muri Rwanda ora Rwanda muri Rwanda muri Rwanda
tubyaye ngo byiduhetse ni koko warababaye ariko ntibizongera ihorere Rwanda ora ora ora
Rwanda rwa Gasabo twari umuhere kuri Gihanga waruhanze ingoma rwoga ingoma Karinga tukiri umwe 94 amateka arahinduka ibyara amata bihinduka amaraso zamarere ziratabara Rwanda turatengamaye humura Rwanda humura ntibizongera
Kwibuka twiyubaka Genocide ntizongere kubaho mu rwatubyaye oya Rwanda humura ntibizongera
Rwanda mubyeyi mwiza ngo byiduhetse twabana bawe tuje kuguhoza tugufata mu mugongo twabuze ababyeyi inshuti abavandimwe ariko twebwe abasigaye ikivi cyanyu tuzacyusa
ora Rwanda muri Rwanda 9 kano kwezi kwari mata abatutsi bari inkongoro zirahana zamarere zibibonye zitabara n'ingoga yabaza ritaha i Rwanda humura Rwanda ibyabaye ntibizongera umukuru nakomeza umuto umuto akomeza umukuru twiyubakira urwatubyaye ora Rwanda
bituzatuma wongera kuba barukundi mubyeyi humura mubyeyi bizongera
intimba wagize uhangayika kwiheba ntibizongera ntibizongera
re Rwanda
kuko amateka yawe
niyo atuma nigira iyo nyumva ndanga ndavuga ntibizongera hora Rwanda impore Rwanda hora Rwanda
Rwanda dufita nyigira ngo namwe nitwe tuzakomeza gusigasira ubwo butwari
amateka yarwo niyo yanjye ibyabaye ntibizongera 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 Rwanda nicyo gihugu cyanjye amateka yarwo niyo yanjye ibyabaye ntibizongera ntibizongera ntibizongera
Muraho, this is the 27th time we remember our beloved ones that died during the 1994 genocide against Tutsi. Let's commemorate together as a country and fight against all the genocide denials in all ways possible as a privilege we owe to the innocent lives. Kwibuka.
I was born after genocide against Tutsi of 1994. Even though I wasn't there, but I still have something to remember. I remember those I might be calling my grandparents, aunties, and uncles, which I never got a chance to know them. that I believe. Remembering them is giving them the value, the dignity that they took from them. When Rwanda and Rwandans remember over 1 million of Tutsis who died in 1994 genocide against Tutsi, I believe it's by holding up and lighting the light of the bright future of this nation. Rwanda, Twiyubaka.
I remember not because my eyes saw it, but because my ears heard the sad stories of the death of my family. I remember because I lost my family before I even knew them. I remember because I lost a happy country and community to genocide that killed my people. I remember all the families that were destroyed, leaving no one to remember them. I remember all the Tutsis that died a miserable death that they didn't deserve. I wasn't born yet, but I lived the effects and wounds of loss that I had before I was born. I remember the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, so that it won't happen again. Kwibuka.
En ce moment, nous commémorons les vies perdues pendant le génocide contre les Tutsis en 1994. Opposons-nous des idéologies du génocide, soutenons le bien que nous, les Rwandais, avons accompli et laissons l'histoire de notre pays inoubliable. Rappelons-nous, unissons-nous et renouvelons. Twiyubaka.
Je commémore toutes les personnes qui ont été tuées pendant le génocide de 1994 contre les Tutsis pour leur rendre hommage. Je commémore aussi pour ne pas oublier notre passé qui nous a appris que sans unité et amour, le pire peut arriver. J'ai décidé de rejoindre l'unité rwandaise pour construire le pays de notre rêve. Twiyubaka.
Do you remember my brother? You used to play with him in our backyard. Today he plays with angels in his graveyard. He was a Tutsi and the sentence was death. That genocide we remember as a mega death. Lucky you were not among the hunted. Do you remember my sister? You sat with her on the same school bench. Recall her funny attempts to speak French. Little did she know her life was to be brief. She was murdered by the men who raped her. Lucky you were just an innocent girl. Do you remember my father? He used to share beer with your father. Their inhonorable cigarettes meant being together. But one day, your father chose to be in a corner, watching my dad being slaughtered by the other. Lucky you, your father is a politician in exile. Do you remember my mother? Like yours, she was a teacher at our school. You used to say she always spoke so cool. When she was being slaughtered by those so cruel, your mother only saved the jewel from her neck. Lucky you, your mother is now a peace activist. I did not forget who you are, who played Kwibuka and other games of mystery, a childhood friend I lost because of our history. Even though I sometimes judge your sophistry, never shall I doubt the truth of your own story. But please, let's talk about my story today. I did not forget your brother. He used to listen to French songs with my brother before my brother joined the armed patriots and your brother joined the militia compatriots. When I learned about your brother's death, I was sorry. My brother is now called an army casualty. I did not forget your father, a man in a suit and a tie with big eyeglasses. I can only imagine his discomfort with the masses, in refugee camps with neither food nor houses. I'm sorry he's traumatized by the experience. My father was tortured before he was killed. I did not forget you, mother, her hairstyle with a chignon without lines, elegance of the elite's wives of those times. Maybe she committed only petty crimes, and she should not be judged as a murderer. My mother was innocent, but murdered. I'm a poet, not a judge. All I do is telling stories and reciting poetry. The genocide we commemorate every year. The memories we keep every second of our lives. The society of broken hearts and puzzled minds. You and I are products of this history. Yes, I know you also have a story to tell. A story of how your relatives lost their lives. I believe I need to also listen to your story. But today, I have a question for you to answer. Do you remember my siblings and parents? Please tell me you remember them. Today, it's 7 April again. All signposts read Kwibuka, remember? Please, let's remember our compatriots, those innocents killed by their own neighbors. Their sin was a name they never signed for. Yes, I'm sure you can remember. Let the politicians make their speeches. Let the scholars present their research findings. But nothing shall ever explain that tragedy. When millions of hours killed millions of hours, please join me in their remembrance. Both of us say never again to genocide.
Okay, now we are going to hear from the author, Mr. Artemon Rurangwa. He's going to briefly share some remarks about his book that was published recently, just 3 months ago. The title of the book is Rwanda, les angoisses d'Adelaide. So whenever you're ready, you can unmute yourself.
Okay, murakoze, muranyumva neza? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, ndabasuhuje mwese. My name is Artemon Rurangwa, as Melissa said. And I live here in Edmonton since 2006. And I live here with my 3 children and my wife. I will take this moment to wish you all enough strength and blessing through these tough days of remembrance. And I also want to thank you, Melchior, and your team for organizing this special day. It is not easy due to the COVID-19 pandemic, as everyone knows. I'm gonna be very brief because I have given not enough time to talk about my book. And I understand the organization is kind of very tough. The title of my book is Rwanda 1994, Les Angoisses d'Adelaide. It was published in French language only, and I have to apologize for that, with the promise to get it translated in English as soon as possible. It was easier for me to publish this book in the language that I am more comfortable in, and you can understand that. It was a big challenge for me to write on this rather difficult subject, which is the rape of the Tutsi women during the 1994 genocide, a subject that only few people wanted to talk about. Why such challenging like that? Because Rwandans never say a word about sexual activity in public. It's a taboo subject in our culture, whether a rape or consensual sexual affairs, and that kind of talk was not allowed in our society since many generations. That is how the women who were raped during the genocide still suffer now, 27 years later, in total and horrifying silence. They dare not speak to their doctor, their family member, if they have some left, and even less to their husband, if they are lucky to have one who would accept to marry a girl who has been raped. Due to this unique cultural way of life, the world today knows very little to nothing about this suffering of the Tutsi women who are from the systemic gang rape and which they were the victim in 1994. Sexual rape was used as a weapon of the genocide against the Tutsi women, which has been confirmed by the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, ICTR, in Arusha, Tanzania. My book is a fiction based on a true story. Many people come to me and ask me why I made it a fiction instead of a testimony. I have purposely chosen to make it a fiction rather than a personalized testimony because I wanted to make this tragedy a voice for all the women who still suffer in a shadow of time, because they still consider this kind of talk as a taboo, and they are so many. Even though Rwanda is now one of the most advanced countries in the world in terms of ethics and equality between men and women, taboos are still present in the generation of yesterday and today. These women needed a boost to handle this type of dialogue, which has to be their first step through the past, leading to a possible healing and decent life. It is not easy. It is a long process, but we will get there, and that is our mission as survivors. I wish I had enough time to elaborate on that, but that is all the time I was given to talk to you today. However, before I leave, I would ask you to please read this book. I'm gonna show it to you. I don't know if you see it. And make it known to those around yourself who can read French. And I repeat, I promise to get it translated soon in English. It is vital for these women to be encouraged to take this step forward. It is time for them to stop living beside their life because of a taboo, while time continues to pass by. For some of these women, it is already late, but for many others, they have to get rid of their heavy burden and start a new life, a new way of life. Then where can you get this book? Let me tell you, it's easy to get it from Amazon. It's available in paperback and ebook format, Kindle. However, as Edmonton is not that far from Calgary, I can promise you I would be more than happy to have it delivered to you in Calgary. If you order this book as a group, in a lot of a minimum of 12 books per order, I can even myself bring them to you. That is only possible because my publishing house is based here in Edmonton. The main goal is not to getting this, the main goal is to getting this information out for our mothers, sisters, and others who still suffering. It's a 498 pages book, 498 page book for $30 Canadian, plus a minimum of $5 for a combined shipping to Calgary. The world must know about this tragedy from which the Tutsi women have been victims 27 years ago. They need our voice to live again, and for the individuals who did this to be brought to justice. Thank you very much for your time and for your valuable contribution to this cause. And I wish you to remain strong in these days. Thank you so much.
Merci, Monsieur Rurangwa. Thank you for shedding light on a topic that absolutely needs to be talked about more. So next, we are going to hear from our third speaker rather, Dr. Chigbo Arthur Nyaduba is an assistant professor in the Department of English at the University of Winnipeg in Manitoba. His teaching and research interests focus broadly on African and African diaspora literatures. His current research explores the cultural representations of genocidal mass atrocities in Africa. Nyaduba is a recipient of several prestigious awards, including a Vanier Canada Graduate Scholarship for his doctoral dissertation at the University of Manitoba, and a J.B. and Maurice C. Shapiro Fellowship at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum for his research on genocides in Nigeria and Rwanda. Just a reminder, after our third speaker, we are going to open the floor for a question and answer period. Either you can raise your hand virtually on Zoom, or you can put your question directly into the chat function, and your questions can be directed at either of our three speakers, and we will facilitate that conversation. So yeah, off to you, Chigbo.
Thank you so much, Larissa. I need to share my screen. Can I do that?
I think so. I think we're gonna get our tech person to.
Okay, it's working now.
Great.
All right, so thank you so much for this invitation and for the opportunity to participate in this year's genocide commemoration. After listening to the previous speakers, I just feel that I don't really have anything to say anymore. I still at a loss for words. But previously, when I received this invitation, I knew that my task today would be a very difficult one, because I have struggled, not just in the context of Rwanda, but also in the Nigerian context, to find the right words or ways to say or speak to some of these kinds of difficult topics. But while Gatera was talking, I was reminded of a famous poem by an American poet, William Stafford. The poem is titled Traveling Through the Dark. And Stafford's poem is based on his own experience of ethical dilemma. It's about a man who, driving on the narrow Wilson River Road, comes across a dead deer that has been hit by another car. and it's getting very dark, and the man realizes the danger that the heap of the dead deer on the road poses to other drivers. And so he pulls up, walks over to toss the deer into the river, and then realizes that it is a pregnant doe. The fawn in the womb is still alive and breathing, waiting to be born, even though its mother is dead. So the man, on finding himself in this ethical dilemma, remarks, "I fought hard for us all, my only swerving, then pushed her over the edge into the river." Like this driver in Stafford's poem, I think I'm asking for your understanding upfront, because I suspect, sadly, that my talk is more or less like pushing a dead pregnant doe with living fawn into the river. Even if only I'm doing this in an effort to find something of substance to share with you today about the subject of genocide in relation to storytelling of the kind that we've already heard today. So there's a very long list of cases of genocides in just the past century alone. The editors of the book Centuries of Genocide, Samuel Totten and William S. Parsons, have documented some of these recent cases of genocides. Yet the list that the editors provide in their book is not even exhaustive. And this is evidence of the sad reality of how prevalent genocide is in our world. In each of the instances of the genocide, killers attempted to eliminate their target groups through a combination of violent actions aimed at exterminating a group physically, biologically, socially, politically, economically, and even environmentally. What perhaps makes many of these cases of genocide really horrifying is the manner and the logic of the violence. As we find in several testimonial accounts by survivors, as we heard earlier today, many of the genocides are crudely intimate affairs, and this element of intimacy adds to the horror of the genocide. Let's consider a few genocidal scenarios, beginning with the case of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. We learn from several survivors and other witness accounts about the nature of the heinous massacres and atrocities perpetrated during this genocide. Many of the killings were carried out by common people in their neighborhoods. The genocide was severely physically brutal. The killers murdered their victims in close proximity using machetes and clubs, as well as guns and grenades. Many of the murders took place in enclosed public spaces, such as churches, schools, stadiums, and at roadblocks, ostensibly to prevent victims from escaping. The effect was to turn massacres into theater shows. And other mass killings happened inside forests and in marshes as perverse forms of hunting. In many instances, the killer and the victim alike knew each other very well, as we heard in that powerful poem. As Mahmoud Mamdani explains in his book, When Victims Become Killers, perpetrators using machetes needed to hack their victims multiple times in order to kill them. In other words, the killings were an intimate affair that was carried out by hundreds of thousands, perhaps even more, and witnessed by millions others. The genocide also involved mass rapes of Tutsi women, many of whom were killed afterwards. Rape victims who survived often contracted terrible deadly diseases in the process, including HIV and AIDS. Some had to contend with the trauma of raising children they conceived from their experiences of genocidal rapes, while at the same time dealing with the trauma of having witnessed the murder of their own spouses and children during the genocide. So extreme experiences such as those in Rwanda have played out in several other contexts with relatively similar consequences. Take the example of the genocide of the Igbo peoples in Nigeria between 1966 and 1970. Following a military coup in January 1966, Many other Nigerian groups scapegoated and blamed the Igbo for the coup and accused them of attempting to establish an Igbo dominance in the country. What followed was a genocidal campaign that saw to the purging of the Igbo in different regions of the country, particularly in the northern region. Just as in the case of Rwanda, neighbors unleashed unimaginable violence against their Igbo neighbors. The killers were simply not content with killing their victims from their actions. Excuse me. But their actions showed that they wanted to extend the violence inflicted on their individual victims to their relatives. So they inflicted incredible forms of mutilations on their victims' bodies, including beheading and disembowelment, as well as raping Igbo women and cutting open the wombs of pregnant Igbo women. They loaded their victims' corpses into lorries and trains and had them transported to the Igbo homeland in the eastern region. Several other victims' bodies were dumped into the Niger River, which coursed from the north down through the southeastern region towards the Atlantic Ocean. These horrible practices were carried out with the mindset of doing violence not to a specific individual victim, but to the Igbo generically conceived. In some other cases of genocide, the brutality and cruelty might not be as gruesome, but the logic of the violence was often similar. It is important to keep in mind that genocide is more than the sum of all these brutal acts of violence. It is all of it and much more. The logic of genocidal violence is that the violence is directed not merely at individual victims. The violence is genocidal because it is aimed at eliminating an entire group. Perpetrators murder and violate their victims, not for any specific thing victims have done or perceived to have done, but instead because of victims' membership or supposed affiliation to a target group. So because genocide targets the life of a group with the aim of extirpating the group, its violence always extends beyond individual victims, as we heard from some of the survivor testimonies. Killing individual members of the group is not an end, but a means. The end is to nullify the existence of a group. This is one sense in which indigenous people's experiences of colonization in Canada, for example, has been understood. As variously are explained by different authors, colonization is genocidal through a combination of actions and policies that aimed to destroy indigenous groups and indigenous identities in Canada. In recent years, attention has been drawn to the violent policies of the Canadian state against indigenous peoples, a heinous expression of which is found in the Indian residential schools. Survivors of the Indian residential schools have recounted episodes of physical, sexual, and spiritual abuses that they suffered in the schools. Just as in the case of Rwanda and Nigeria, the violence of the Indian residential school was intimate and largely perpetrated by those closely known by the victims. The underlying and cumulative violence, again, systematically aimed at the elimination of groups. So what's at stake following a genocide, and how are we supposed to make sense of genocide? Already from what we heard earlier, storytelling. In 1998, a group of 10 African writers and artists were sponsored to Rwanda 4 years after the genocide in order to interact with survivors and perpetrators and to write about the genocide. The project was called Rwanda, Writing as a Duty to Memory. That's in its English translation. The guiding objective of the project was to attempt genocide memorialization out of a sense of the writer's moral duty to victims of the genocide. The underlying assumption is that after genocides happen, there has to be some form of reckoning for the sake of justice, healing, and for posterity. And one major instrument that has come handy in our efforts to reckon with genocides and mass atrocities has been storytelling. In its most basic humanistic understanding and practice, storytelling is how we as humans make meaning, collaborate with one another, and build community. So it is perhaps no surprise that it has become a mechanism for confronting mass atrocities. One of the writers who participated in the Rwanda project is the Senegalese writer Boubacar Boris Diop. He published an influential novel on the genocide titled Murambi, the Book of Bones. In another book of essays titled Africa Beyond the Mirror, Diop talks about his experience of writing this Murambi novel. He says that during his visit to Rwanda as part of the project, some genocide survivors pressed him not to write fiction about the genocide. As he puts it, it is worth mentioning, by the way, the desperate pleas made by some of the survivors from the moment they understood the purpose of our visit to Rwanda. We implore you not to write things in your novel which didn't actually happen to us. You must repeat faithfully what we have told you. The entire world has to find out exactly what went on here. Diop understands the survivors' anxieties as an expression of their desire to be believed by those hearing their stories. The violence they experienced already seemed unbelievable even in its factual representations. So for these survivors, the idea of someone fictionalizing an experience that seemed more unreal than fiction might easily appear to be a kind of double tragedy. For fiction so conceived risks trivializing their experience of extreme brutality and suffering by reducing it to the status of a work of the imagination. And this anxiety expressed by the Rwanda genocide survivors is based in part on the understanding that genocide is indeed a product of fiction, the kind of fiction that Chinua Achebe has described as malevolent fiction. And to quote Achebe, belief in superior and inferior races, belief that some people who live across our frontiers or speak a different language from ourselves are the cause of all the trouble in the world, or that our own particular group or class or caste has a right to certain things which are denied to others. The belief that men are superior to women and so on, all are fictions generated by the imagination. To put it simply, what Achebe means is that racism and similarly oppressive ideologies are clear examples of malevolent fiction, and that this kind of fiction has been at the core of genocidal acts. Think about the kind of fiction that convinced millions of people for many centuries now that some other humans are by nature inferior to them, or that some people, by virtue of their complexion, deserve to be enslaved, destroyed, or oppressed. So fiction of this kind is a dangerous practice if it can influence people's behavior in these consequential ways. Think about the fiction that provided the rationale for colonization. A group of people traveled to other people's land and used brute force to conquer them, and then went about convincing themselves and others that they did the right thing because the people they destroyed were after all not really people, and therefore not entitled to ownership of the land and resources, and that their only use was in their exploitation and subjugation. Think about that fiction. Think about the fiction that gave impetus to slavery, or the kinds of fiction that supplied the rationale for the attempted elimination of the Tutsi in Rwanda or the Igbo in Nigeria. Fictions that provided different ideas about what Tutsi or Igbo means, and why these identities pose a threat and must be eliminated. So it is understandable that victims of these kinds of dangerous fictions would be wary that their experiences of extreme violence risked further being reduced to works of fiction. In other words, the risk is that the fact of what happened to them could easily become mistaken as products of some writer's imagination and not real or actual experiences of people. So we are here confronted with the fact and truth of a genocide. The word fact signifies something that has an objective truth value, something that is not based on how each person chooses to interpret it, but instead the fact of the matter suggests the truth and reality of the matter that anyone sees or should see as such. The fact of a genocide, therefore, is supposed to be its truth as it is. Fiction of any kind may threaten this idea of the facticity of a genocide if it takes its place and turns real experiences into works of the imagination. Yet, the writer Abubakar Boris Diop refused to heed the survivors' pleas to write facts instead of fiction. And he explains that his refusal is based in part on the very fraught nature of facts and how we have come to encounter some kinds of facts, particularly in the context of the genocide. Anyone familiar with atrocity encounters in different parts of the world, especially in African context, may perhaps attest to this fraught nature of what often goes as facts, especially in cases where perpetrators have remained in firm control of political and economic power, and so stifle any damning evidence against the atrocities that they have committed. But beside this possibility of manipulating facts, facts can indeed be cruel when in the wrong hands or when they are decontextualized. Consider this story that I was told about an extended relative of mine who, if he were alive before I was born, would have been my uncle. One of the most heinous atrocities that the Nigerian military government committed against the Igbo during the Nigeria-Biafra War from 1967 to 1970 came in the form of a deliberate policy of starvation. At the time, the Nigerian military, armed both by the British government and the Soviet Union, had managed to blockade and surround the former eastern region of Nigeria, which is the homeland of the Igbo. Because it proved dangerous to launch military campaigns inside the Igbo heartland, the Nigerian military decided to execute what it called a policy of starvation, which meant shutting off any aids and food supplies to the region, bombing farmlands and markets and refugee camps and hospitals just to make sure that the people starved. In the process, hundreds of thousands of people, perhaps millions, were mass starved to death. This uncle of mine, who was a young man then, at that time it was in 1969, was perhaps at the point of death by starvation when he and other starving people in his neighborhood came upon some burnt corpses of Nigerian soldiers who had been killed a night before during a battle nearby. As the story went, he and others survived on those burnt bodies for some days before they could find relief. The community became notorious afterwards for this act of surviving on the burnt corpses of soldiers, a reputation that came short of being called a cannibal or a savage community. Some years after the war, the man went to take a wife from another town. If you're familiar with the way marriages happen in Nigeria, you would understand that some interrogations often preceded the ceremony. So during one of these inquests into the man's past, someone asked him to answer matter-of-factly whether or not it was true that he ate a human corpse during the war. The poor man was stupefied, and his only response was to walk out on that family. He would later take his own life. Facts could be cruel, sometimes, but the more important thing is that facts are not entirely immune to interpretation. Whereas some of us would consider his condition as a mark of his extreme debasement and try to understand what forced people like him to such desperate acts of survival, some others could use the fact of his survival as a validation of his innate propensity to savagery and cannibalism. In his book, The Drowned and the Saved, Holocaust survivor Primo Levi describes slightly different condition involving a group of Jewish prisoners known as the Sonderkommandos at the Auschwitz death camps. The Sonderkommandos were the Jewish prisoners turned into a special squad by the German SS guards. The Sonderkommandos were charged with killing fellow Jewish people. Basically, they ran the gas chambers and the crematoria. They ensured that condemned Jewish people were efficiently and neatly vanished in the crematoria. And as Levi describes in the book, it was the task of the Sonderkommandos to maintain order among the new Jewish arrivals, often completely unaware of the destiny awaiting them, who were to be sent into the gas chambers, to extract the corpses from the chambers, to pull gold teeth from jaws, to cut women's hair, to sort and classify clothes, shoes, and the contents of the luggage, to transport the bodies to the crematoria and oversee the operation of the ovens, to extract and eliminate the ashes. This does not mean that the Sunda commandos are spared. In fact, they were usually not allowed to live for too long in the camps because they knew too much. They were only allowed some ridiculous privileges, such as better food, and they were separated from other prisoners. But eventually they were sent to the gas chambers, and they had overseen and run for the German SS guards. So how are we supposed to judge the Sunda commandos? According to Levy, our ability to judge falters when confronted by the Sunda commando. Questions immediately arise, convulsed questions for which one would be hard-pressed to find an answer that reassures us about man's nature. Why did they accept that task? Why didn't they rebel? Why didn't they prefer death? In reality, some refused to join this fort and were killed instantly. Some others rebelled. In fact, the only documented account of organized rebellion in the Auschwitz death camps was carried out by members of a Sunda commando squad who succeeded in blowing up one of the crematoria. The revolt, however, failed, and every one of the rebelling group was killed by the German guards. The point that Levy tries to make with this story of the Sunda commando is that experiences of genocides often resist easy judgments and authoritative assertions about facts. The facts of killing are not generally what is at stake here. The facts of mass killings are everywhere around us. As we speak, we are slaughtering people in Yemen, in Syria, in Central African Republic, in Nigeria. The displaced Rohingya people are still suffering some of the most heinous conditions of genocidal displacement and violation. The point is that the knowledge of genocide is not in short supply. We do know about genocides. However, it is not precisely this basic knowledge or fact of genocide that is at stake for some people. To be sure, this knowledge of the fact of the matter is important, if only because they help us to counter the denials of oppressive regimes and their supporters. Yet, this informational kind of knowledge may refer to what Auschwitz survivor Charlotte Delbo has called useless knowledge. Useless because there is nothing edifying to learn from the multiple ways of cruelly dehumanizing the human being and brutally crushing its spirit. Useless because our stupendous knowledge about genocides has not made us able to prevent genocides from happening. What is at stake here is not if that facts lack something basic that can make us believe and imagine the severity of genocide, or that the truth of a genocide exceeds any factual elements that constitute our relationship to the event. The point instead is perhaps best articulated, just as Gatera told us earlier, by another genocide survivor, Innocent Rweliliza, as recounted in John Hasfeld's book, The Antelope Strategy. Innocent reflects on the lack of images of the actual events of the genocide after observing a film production of the massacres of 1994. To quote Innocent, during the yearly mourning period in April, many pictures of the genocide, photos of skeletons and corpses in particular, are made public on television and in the newspapers or exhibits. I can accept that because they are pictures from after the genocide. One almost never sees pictures taken during the killings. A genocide must be photographed before the killings to show clearly the preparations, the faces of the leaders, the stockpiled machetes, the complicity of the French soldiers or the Belgian priests, the careful organization of the hunting expeditions. A genocide can be photographed afterward to show the corpses, the survivors' haggard faces, the arrogance or shame of the killers, the churches piled high with bones, to convince disbelieving minds and thwart negationists. But the intimate truth of the genocide belongs to those who lived it, and so does the right to withhold this truth, for it is not something to be shared with just anyone. And I thought what Gatera shared with us earlier highlights this intimate truth that is at the heart of my talk today. So for Rweliliza, while images of the aftermath of an atrocity can convey something of the fact of a genocide and suggest the emotions and activities that accompanied the killings, there is always something unreachable about facts, even in their visual forms. One of these unreachables could be in the fact that our access to a genocide happens to come largely from the debris it has left behind, but not all the things that came prior to and during the genocide. The stakes are not so much about learning about the facts from the debris of genocide. This type of knowledge is perhaps useful according to Innocent, if only to convince disbelieving minds and thwart negationists. What is more at stake, however, is the intimate truth of the genocide. The intimate truth of the genocide is not readily available to anyone, and according to Innocent, is held or rather guarded by a genocide survivor. This intimate truth of a genocide is perhaps at the heart of the story I told about my relative who survived on the charred bodies of soldiers, and perhaps at the heart of Primo Levi's account of the Sunda commandos at the Auschwitz camps. The point is that as we speak presently, genocides are happening in different parts of the world. We probably know the fact of these killings quite well, but these facts have not moved us to consider seriously the gravity of what is happening and the urgency to force governments to act to end these atrocities. So the question is, why are we able to hear about these facts and still go home and sleep well, do our summer travels, host friends and family, laugh and live our lives as if nothing as horrible as a genocide is taking place elsewhere? Perhaps it is because we are distant from the intimate truths of these atrocities. Perhaps because the kinds of malevolent fiction that dehumanize victims of genocides have also infected us somehow to accept that these victims deserve their suffering, or at least that they can suffer without us feeling that it matters so much as to pause our own lives to see that others do not lose theirs. It is on this account of instrumentalizing the intimate truths of atrocities to awaken our moral consciousness that we require the kind of storytelling that Achebe has called beneficent fiction. This is a form of storytelling that, while not pretending to be truth or fact, brings us as close as possible to the feelings, the attitudes, and the impressions that often accompany the committal of these kinds of atrocities. What makes these kinds of stories different from dangerous or malignant fiction is that besides their propensity to tell us about the intimate sides of a genocide and their potential to humanize the experiences of those who have been dehumanized by virulent fiction, these kinds of stories also carry an internal alarm system that warns us against dangerous fiction, such as racism. So I want to close by echoing some words that I find to be instructive and as providing a fitting tribute to the dark subject of today's talk. These words come from a book that has occupied my thoughts in recent years based on the 1994 genocide in Rwanda. The book is called The Shadow of Imana, Travels in the Heart of Rwanda, and it's written by the Ivorian writer Veronique Tajo. Tajo is one of the 10 African writers who visited Rwanda in 1998 to write about the genocide. There is this particular story in Tajo's book that I think summarizes all what I have been trying to say today about the need to seek the intimate truths of a genocide in our reflections. As the story goes, following the genocide of the Tutsi in Rwanda, some dead victims had been so enraged about the injustice of their brutal deaths that they refused to quit the earth when the time came for them to quit. One particular dead man whose head had been cut off was so full of anger that he kept screaming unceasingly until a torrential rainfall was unleashed on the community of the living. The rain poured non-stop nights on end, and the dead man went about knocking on the doors of the living, who, as Tajo puts it, have been walled up inside their own pain, deafened by their own tears and their regrets. The dead man cries, "Why are you abandoning me? Now I am a corpse and you no longer recognize me. Can you not feel my presence among you?" Discerning elders in the community understood that the refusal of the dead to leave the earth threatened the survival of the community, and so they invited a diviner to help and appease the dead who had refused to leave the earth. I will quote at length from Tajo's book. When the soothsayer arrived, The venerable man, a great initiate into the secrets of time, greeted the rain, turned to the wind, and began to listen to the angered spirit. He heard the story of his murder, the humiliations and torture which he had undergone before he was beheaded. When the spirit fell silent, the diviner offered many words of appeasement. Then he added, "Even as I weep, I know that my pain can never reach even the outer limit of your suffering, you who have been mowed down by cruelty. I come to humbly ask you and all the dead to receive me into the house of silence and mourning, in this dark night where memories open up like wounds. I stand before you all, dead in your thousands, so you may turn your burning gaze on my great nakedness. I am vulnerable before you, the wretched of humanity. Who am I to dare to cross the threshold of your pain? Who am I to disturb the course of your anger? I am the beggar in search of truth. I am lost in the abyss of our violence. I am he who asks you to agree to give the living another chance. I want to echo the soothsayer's words, though conjured up in a fiction, to say that I am vulnerable before you, a wretched of humanity. I too am lost in the abyss of the violence for which I do not understand. I am the beggar in search of the intimate truths of these kinds of violence, and I can only hope that my words today, with all their limitations, provoke a similar search in you all for the intimate truths with which to strengthen our fragile moral world. Murakoze Chani, Dalo Nurine, thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation. Now we're going to open the floor to questions and answers for all three of our last speakers. I'm going to hand the duties over to Dr. Hejin King. She is an award-winning doctor and a professor at the Faculty of Social Work at the University of Calgary. Dr. King's research interests focus on psychosocial processes involving survivors of organized and structural
I think we are losing Melissa.
Okay, great. You can hear me. Perfect. Yeah, I was just introducing Professor and Dr. Hejin King. I'm not sure if you heard the blurb, I'll repeat it. She is a professor at the Faculty of Social Work, the University of Calgary. Dr. King's research interests focus on psychosocial processes involving survivors of organized and structural violence, including approaches to cross-cultural mental health and forgiveness and reconciliation among survivors of organized violence. So whenever you guys are ready, if you want to throw some questions into the chat function for either of our, all three of our speakers, and Dr. King will facilitate that conversation.
Okay, so the technology just kicked in. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening to the keynote speaker who gave us a great challenge, but also building on the stories that were shared before, building on the story of Gatera, the intimate story, which we have carried on in every commemoration event we have had in the past, but also inviting us to those intimate stories. So we have a few minutes for questions. I guess to open up, I'm going to ask the first question to Dr. Chugbo Ayanduge. So you shared a lot with us today. You shared you have been in Rwanda yourself. You have studied the genocides. You have read tons of books. You have related to your own experience as an Igbo man. And the story you shared about your extended uncle speaks to what the people tend to view as a fiction of what that intimate story that only those who went through it can describe it, and of which we can't judge. What would you tell Calgarians who didn't go through the genocide, but who are here to support Rwandans who went through it? And I guess I'm associating this question also to the story that Gatera told. There is that deep suffering that only those who lived through it can relate to. How can we tell our friends and the allies in Calgary to attempt to relate to our intimate stories? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. It's a very difficult question because it asks, how can these stories move people to really understand the experiences that people have suffered, and have these stories change mindsets and cause certain forms of changes in society? I really don't know, because we've had a lot of these stories, and many times these stories have caused some form of changes in many societies. Some of the, perhaps if one chooses to call them successes in terms of our understanding of the terrible things that have happened, came from these kinds of stories, stories about colonization and colonial violence, about genocides and atrocities of different kinds. Yet, these stories have not succeeded in causing the kinds of changes that one would wish to see. In Nigeria, for example, these stories would cause more problems than force different kinds of reckoning with what happened. In the Canadian context, I think that people have to come to a point where they have to begin to tell certain truths to themselves. The truths about where they are and the privileges and the kinds of violence or injustices that give them those privileges. I think being true to oneself perhaps begins the process of listening deeply to these intimate stories. Because when one is not true, it's easy for me to empathize with someone who suffers violence from another person. But when I'm told that my father or my brother has inflicted the violence on this person, do I show similar kind of empathy? Or what happens there? What happens when I find myself within the group of those responsible for certain kinds of violence, even if I'm not directly responsible? How do I deal with that? So telling the truth to myself, being truthful to myself, and acknowledging and being ready to face any consequences of these kinds of atrocities perhaps opens my mind to accepting and listening closely to these kinds of things. But again, it's easier said for me than done.
Thank you very much. Now I open the floor to the audience. If you have any question, raise your hand or type in your question, so that the person on the tech can unmute you. Thank you. Yes, Lisa Lorenzetti.
Thank you, Regina. I wanted to thank all the speakers, very much appreciated and feel honored to be here commemorating the day with everyone. One question I have is, because violence is used as a way to pave the way for certain privileges for certain groups and to maintain those privileges over other groups, sometimes and relating to the Canadian context, people may be willing to accept what happened, but not to address the privileges that will remain because the violence has, basically put them in a completely different category. So I'm just wondering your thoughts around that, because I think that it's only step one is to acknowledge. We even have a hard time doing that here in Canada, let alone to address white privilege, European colonial privilege. I'm just wondering about the relationship between this context also and the two contexts you've been talking about today. Thank you.
Okay, can I? I think just following from what I said previously, it's again a question of power, right? So if I have if I inherited a house from my family's violation of other people, the displaced people who own this house, and they give this house to me and my family is living here and I've come to depend entirely on this house, I can understand the difficulty when the victims, the original owners of this house, request that I return the house and not just acknowledge that my parents stole the house from them. People generally don't like to yield privileges. We have to accept that fact. And that's why that victims and those who have suffered are usually left with these kinds of intimate stories, stories that touch the heart in ways that could help to begin to not just acknowledge, but seek serious ways of redress that would restore some form of I don't know, because you can't heal from these kinds of things. It's difficult. Justice makes no sense. In the aftermath of genocide, many of our ethical structures, they lose meaning. What is justice? What is healing? How do you heal from someone who lost everything? It makes no sense. But then we still need these stories in ways that maybe help us to begin to reckon and think of ways to find some form of imperfect redress. But again, usually changes happen through power, and those who have power don't like to lose it. So I don't know the extent to which these kinds of stories can help, but I don't see any other alternative here outside of these kinds of stories. So we have to keep doing what we can. Again, these forms of stories and testimonies have been really helpful. Think about colonization in different parts of the world. We needed people to tell these kinds of stories to touch the conscience of many who challenged those with power, right? So perhaps maybe that's where these stories are being useful as instruments for causing some form of changes. But realistically—
Question time.
Yeah, but realistically, we have to, do much more than listening to stories. We need to allow these stories to touch and provoke us to do more. You have to unmute.
Okay, sorry about that. I wanted to thank you for the questions and the answers. I'm wondering if Gatera, would you have something to add to the question that was asked? So the question was about, so what happens when through violence, some people have gained a number of privileges, and then the question of listening to intimate stories is really to demand for some, what will be required for people who are listening to intimate stories to be able to yield power and privileges. Can you please unmute Gatera?
Okay, good. Yeah, thanks so much for questions. And you ask me what the privilege we can do. Say again once a question.
So there was that for the stories that are very intimate to the
Yes.
violence that is committed,
Mm.
needs to be listened to.
Yes.
But what will create a change or will allow people, especially those who benefit from the violence committed,
Yes.
to change at all?
Yeah, this we're trying to speak out, because sometime the world was close eyes when it's they're supposed to do something before. Maybe next time, other country or somewhere else, the world can react quick. Last few days ago, we see Rohingya people. They was dying when the nations still thinking about it. You are thinking about it when the thousands of people are dying. We are talking this maybe to wake up. It's a wake of nations and people, and those are committed to be able to react quick. Otherwise, that's why you say never again.
So never again, and for the survivors to keep speaking up, hoping that someone will listen and react and stop it from happening again.
Yes.
Any other questions? So there is a question, so there's a question from Yaya. So how can we hold the colonial powers accountable for all the violence that they have inflicted on countries in the global south beyond the rhetoric of international agencies' accountabilities? That's a question for who? Who wants to give it a shot? So Chikbo, are you able to unmute? So can the person on the tech unmute Dr. Chikbo? Okay, he's still muted.
All right, thanks. So it's if we want to be realistic, I don't see how, because the colonizers are still colonizing the world. They are still running things. Every case of genocide that we've witnessed in recent years, usually the so-called superpowers are behind it. You know, we shouldn't live under the illusion that it's accountability for things that happened in the past, because colonization has continued, and not just in different forms, continued in the ways that it happened in the past, right? When just 2 years ago or so, when Rwanda tried to ban the importation of used clothes to the country, we knew the pressure that the US put on Rwanda and different African countries to insist that they must import used clothes, right? Used clothes, right? And why is that? Why do Africans need to wear used clothes by Europeans? And these used clothes are actually multi-billion-dollar businesses, right? So colonization has continued. The weapons of killings, they are manufactured by colonizers. But how do we stop them? I don't know, right? Maybe we have to return to the revolutionary discourse on decolonization, and decolonization, not the rhetoric of it, but actually what decolonization means, full autonomy to people. But I don't know how we can challenge those in power without, and that's the thing. Usually when power attacks us, the only logical response is also to reproduce the cycle of power's violence. And many of us don't think that is ideal. Again, the intimate stories, we return to that as a moral weapon that we can use as alternative to violent revolutions, to cause some form of that kind of revolution that perhaps over time we can win small victories that translate to bigger ones. But at the moment, maybe we have to all stop sleeping and insist that certain things have to change beyond just protest, talking about it, but insist that things must happen differently. I think many of us are comfortable, and when we are comfortable, we listen to these things as news on TV, and then we go to sleep, and life continues. They happen far away. It's in the nature of how we've been structured. Maybe these stories will help us to begin to rethink those attitudes.
Really a great challenge to all of us. How do we listen to these intimate stories, and in many cases, even like watch them in our day-to-day news and go to sleep and host those dinners that you talked about as if nothing is happening in the world. So very interesting. There is another question that is asking, so how do you compare Canada with Rwanda in terms of racial discrimination? What can be done to minimize racial discrimination worldwide and in Canada? What would you suggest to stop chances of another genocide? And the question is again to you, Chigba.
I'm not sure I can speak to Rwanda in terms of what is going on, because I would be pretending to know so much about Rwanda, given that I've only visited for just a few months. But I can speak to racism in Canada, which is there for all of us to to see, because the very foundation of this country is racism. So we have to understand that a nation founded on racism is still governed, by racism. And what that means is that in this society, the very original structure of relations, in other words, placing whiteness above every other thing, has remained intact. And how do we begin to dismantle those structures of racism and level everything? Again, we have to look inwards, right? We have to think seriously what it means to be in Canada, to be Canadian, and then accept many of the kinds of things that we see. Killings happening regularly, especially in Alberta, police killings of racialized peoples, that we keep speaking about these things, tells us that we've not come any far, right? That there's so much more to do. Any kind of racism is as bad as it gets. There's nothing like light racism. There's nothing like it's better here than it is, say, in the US. As long as it's racism, it's racism. Perhaps the reason that it looks better is also because that screen, those dangerous fictions had screened us away from seeing the violence for what it is. Yeah, so I don't know how to compare that, but I don't think they are separate, because it's a system that established so many kinds of things across different parts of the world. And that system, some people call it imperialism. It's still happening, right? Canadian companies are doing business in different African contexts, supported by the military and supported by other Western nations, destroying people's environments and stealing their resources, taxing them. The very economic system that we have is genocidal. It impoverishes and destroys different parts, people in different parts of the world. So it's a very big monster that we are talking about here. But if we go in terms of specifics within the Canadian context, it's not an equal society. So what are we doing about that? How do we address that beside cosmetic responses or saying that things are getting better, right?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think you are raising very important questions that before we even think of and react to what happens outside Canada, how do we react to local forms of violence that are systemic, but also that are embedded in our day-to-day experiences, where there are people who have similar kinds of intimate stories of suffering and pain and loss. But of course, when we are talking about racism in the context of Canada, people also need to understand that anti-Tutsi in Rwanda was almost like a kind of racism that portrayed the members of the Tutsi people in Rwanda as foreigners, people who could easily be discriminated, marginalized. So the question can be asked to what is being done in Rwanda. I think we were looking at the commemorations already taking place in Rwanda, and speaking to family members, it was very interesting to hear the stories that when we were doing this commemoration, we're going through the bereavement for in Rwanda that goes until July, that all Rwandans are invited to be part of the process, to listen to those intimate stories. And it's very interesting to see the youth who were not born yet in '94, who are taking on the job of being part of the future, that healing, of learning and moving from stories, those intimate stories, to stories of healing. There's a question from Melissa. Do you want to, if someone can unmute Melissa to ask a question?
Yeah, sorry, it's not Melissa, it's Melissa's Zoom, but my name is MJ. I'm actually in Toronto, but my family's in Edmonton. My mom is in Vancouver. Thank you, Regine, for inviting me. And thank you, everybody, for speaking. My question might be for Gatera, I think. Okay, so my context is that my mom, lost her whole family, and we lost our family in the genocide, her brothers or sisters and nephews and nieces. But I've lived in Canada, I was born in Ethiopia, so I wasn't in Rwanda. But my struggle or question has to do with, I think, the way my mom copes with losing her brothers and sisters and their children. And she wasn't in Rwanda, she was in Canada when it happened. Very much like you were talking, she for her, it's going to Jehovah and praying for the resurrection and seeing her brothers and sisters in paradise. So I'm not sure what my question is, except I don't know what to do with that. Like, I understand it helps, but I don't, like you said, there's wounds that people have that you can't reach. And so for me, I guess the question is like, I don't know, 27 years, I haven't known how to reach those wounds for my mom, but also she doesn't necessarily she'll go to commemoration sometimes, but she won't necessarily reach with Rwandese for that either. So I don't know if this question is useful for other people who are like the children of people who are survivors and who grew up here. But if you have any insights into, I don't know, I'm just not sure what to do with And I study trauma and all those things, so I have a lot of book knowledge, but in reality, like very simple, my mom, I really wouldn't know, other than to listen to what I've already heard her say, what to do other than, okay, we'll wait till the afterlife, or I don't know. That's my question.
Thank you. Gatera,
Yeah.
any ideas?
Yeah, do you hear me?
Mhm.
Yeah. As a believers, the Bible says, anyone who call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. I have a hope too of my people, because they had a chance, because they knew there's no other way only to die. I remember someone told me how they killed my mom, where they was hiding in my house. They heard that the Indian coming to kill them. She ran out, said, "Oh God, help me!" The last words. She was old. She can't run far. There was just they kill her right away, and at least the last words she was calling, "Oh Lord, help me." For God is not asking too much to listen to you. We know the story of the two thieves on the cross. For that reason, I mean, only for those one who believe in the Lord, who believe the Bible, what it says, we have a hope that our people, at least they had that chance. You know, sometimes when you killed by accident, there is no preparation. Just puff, you die right away. But those one who was waiting to die, they was only waiting the time. They knew they will die for sure, but they don't know the time. I can say, for those people, they need, who lost their people, they have, we have a hope that the end, they have good end. And those one who lost, who are hopeless because they don't have, they don't know about their people, only the comfort, the zone comfortable is to lay on God. Otherwise, the other methodology may work, may not, but methodology of God is only the best way to help people. I remember myself when I was really completely hopeless. Since I know that God is taking care of my problem, before even to know that my family is still alive, the hope was built up quick. What I was feeling was there was change quick, because I know someone somewhere is caring. But if you don't believe anything, it's very hard. I can come and tell you good words after I left. I can come and I scratch your back, as I say, but it doesn't work much. He worked only for 1 minute, for maybe 1 hour. But when I lay down on my bedroom, all the situation come as a fresh. But when we give someone our burden, you know, sometimes as a psychologist, if you talk to someone your problem and you believe he's caring about what you are talking about, it's like to take some from one bottle to other bottle. Just he emptied himself and he released what he had, or the rotten wound is clean up a little bit. That's why when we have someone who can better understand us, we can share our story, especially who understand better. It can help to be able to treat the wounds.
Yeah. I wonder, so we are also very cautious of the time. Thank you for the answer. I'm just wondering if Chikbo will have any few words. And if you can hang around for the next 5 minutes, we promise we'll be closing up.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, I that's a very difficult one, because it's there's so much there, you know, and I don't know how people can heal. My grandma, who is late now, was never able to tell me her story about her experience crossing the front lines to find food for her family during the war. Each time I asked, she said it was a very terrible thing. Let's move on. But one day she told a different kind of story, you know, again, partly in response to the question Athemon asked about denial. Because in Nigeria, the denial is everywhere. It's not genocide, it's this, you know, not that people weren't killed, but you know, for whatever reason. So my attitude to those who deny, I'm not trying to convince anyone about things that if they are really serious, you know, because some people are detractors. It's not ignorance, it's willful, deliberate denial. There's hardly any way you can convince someone who is deliberately trying to deny and cause more pain. These kinds of intimate stories perhaps could touch some people's hearts and they could change. But for some others, they are hardened and there's really nothing we can do about that. My grandma confronted that because she lost her property to what they called abandoned property and all that. And she went back after the war and they chased her away, almost killed her and took her property and all of that. And she was a core Catholic till her death. But she still believed in this African traditional belief system that dead people are actually not dead, you know, they are there, right? And that was why I found that story in Veronique Tajo's book very moving, even though I understand the metaphorical significance of that story. But that any society, you know, think of the millions of people who died in the Atlantic Ocean, people we've killed as societies, and they are mourned and all that. So she felt that they can't just die. Their lives couldn't just be meaningless. There has to be something. And if we as societies refuse to reckon with that, that thing must haunt us. Those societies must never succeed. And they won't know why they are going through that, right? So there's so much injustice and blood on the land. And maybe when we listen again to discerning voices, to the diviners, maybe we need to begin to appease in a different way, not ways that would heal people who are wounded, but actually for our own good, ways that would encourage some form of reckoning, and people who are wounded and traumatized would be confident enough to embrace society and forgive, because we need their forgiveness.
That's very powerful. We have one last question, and that question comes from Arithemo, and that's for you, Dr. Nyanduba. The question is, knowing that genocides have three main phases, preparation, execution, and denial. Besides teaching and speaking loud, what would be other best tools to be used to fight against the denial in this time of social media, where people misuse what they wrongly call freedom of speech? And that will be the last question.
Yeah, that's a very powerful question. I think I touched on that in part. Deniers, again, are detractors. Sometimes you don't argue with people like that. Again, is to be true to oneself. And there are things we cannot change. I think many societies like Rwanda and the constant commemoration events, I think, are one way in which we could fight against these kinds of denialism. Some other ways, you know, besides schooling and all of that, again, they have to be based on reckoning. Societies choosing to acknowledge the terrible things that they have done. Canada seemed to try to do that with the TRC thing, but clearly it wasn't based on any serious reckoning, as it is for me, largely based on politics and legal system forcing the Canadian state to do that. And that's why we are still talking about these things in the way we do today. It's a very difficult question because you can't control how people are actually heinous, and if those terrible racist fictions have influenced and shaped how people see things, the only way I think we can counter that is through these kinds of intimate stories, unless we have the power to force things. But if we do have that power, I don't think we need to rely so much on these intimate stories, because that power is always terrible and corrupt, and that's what we are fighting against with these kinds of stories.
Thank you very much. Very interesting questions. I think we can be here for the whole evening. I want to thank everyone who is still gathered here. And I am very cautious that it's already past 10 minutes past 5. So I get it back to Larissa, who is our MC this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you everyone for participating with really thoughtful questions and engaging with the speakers who put a lot of work into all aspects of this program. I'm going to pass it to Mel for some closing remarks, to thank the final participants. Just get you to unmute yourself. Where is Melchior?
Hello, hope I can be heard. Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much to Dr. Chigbo. We are so pleased to this end for the whole presentation and breaking down everything about the genocides and what people get to incur throughout the experiences, especially. I got to capture one quote in the book you shared at last by Jean Hatzfeld, and the quote goes, "The intimate truth of the genocide belongs to those who lived it, and so does the right to withhold it, for it is not something to be shared with just anyone." And to that, I would love to appreciate Gatera for having accepted to recount his story, his truth of what happened, to bring about the whole experiences of the genocide as it happened. It's precious for us to get to hear that and to know the journey that he had to endure, along with other survivors among us. But this moment, I want to thank everyone who participated. Every year, the commemoration is made possible through the effort of volunteer organizers who gather in person or online to see that a day like this is successfully organized. And so to everyone who committed a great deal of time, it's needless to say that your drive to participate goes, one cannot summarize it in just one word. But I would like to say thank you greatly to Jean-Claude, to Zavalin, Dr. Regine King, Dr. Glenn, Rayland, Andy, Mujenzi, Jeanette, Costo, Kathy, Gabi, Coco, Christine, Bienvenue, Norbert, and Njenzi, but most especially to our MC, who did a great work moderating the event so well. So thank you so much. We are still in the COVID time. It's tough time that everyone is going through. And it's critical for us to follow public health directives. And through it all, we are in it together. We would have wished to meet in person, but since it wasn't possible due to the pandemic that we are all facing, we very well hope that next year and the years to come, we'll get to meet in person. Thank you so much. I'll revert back to you, Larissa. And again, thank you.
Okay, yeah, I don't have much else to say. I think all the thanks and well wishes were done. You did a great job of wrapping that up. Yeah, closing remarks, go and buy Artemon's book. If you can't read it in French, we'll wait patiently for the English version of it, surely. And we look forward to the next time that we'll be able to see each other. Hopefully it'll be really soon. But until then, take care, stay safe.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.